Please welcome Chief Operating Officer, Double Verify, Matt McLaughlin.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Matt McLaughlin. That is a lot of background noise. I appreciate you listening over the background noise. I've been Chief Operating Officer at Double Verify for 10 years, so leading primarily our product and engineering efforts, and I'm really excited to speak with you today about some of the latest developments and our thinking about how we evolve performance measurement and measure things like outcomes. So, you know, before we get into the weeds, and with 25 minutes, I won't get too far into the weeds, but I think it's really important to take a step back and think about, you know, how does any brand, how does any marketing team measure a successful ad campaign? And it could be anything from obviously direct measures, you know, of success, direct online sales, to things like brand awareness, brand lift, all of those metrics that you have come to accept as the KPIs, which in some manner are a proxy for success, right? Everybody wants success of the brand, success of driving the outcomes that generates revenue. And you know, it doesn't matter what those KPIs are, we're all facing a little bit of headwinds when it comes to how do we evaluate those KPIs and what are we thinking about how that's going to transition over time, right? So I am sure here I am preaching to the choir, right, around the challenges associated with, you know, how do we measure those KPIs in a privacy-first world? Technical changes, regulatory changes, changes within your own organization's legal policy are likely all making it harder to measure success of your marketing campaigns the same way that you've done it historically, right? And what we see here is a series of marketer concerns around connecting those dots. How am I going to continue to measure KPIs that are important to me around, you know, success of my campaign when I can't put together a common audience or a common identifier, or I'm being stopped to do that, right? So, you know, Double Verify has been thinking about this problem for some time, and you know, we're really sort of excited to talk about the evolution and how we think the paradigm is going to change and how we've partnered with some of our brands in order to do that, right? So we're really pioneering a new paradigm, which is measuring quality and performance and doing it on every impression on your digital media plan, while ensuring it's done in a privacy compliant way. Do it without requirements to link activity by, you know, a hashed email address or a user ID. We all know the challenges associated with data onboarding and match rates and those sorts of things, right? So, and you know, this might look like, you know, geez, I didn't know Double Verify did those things, and that's probably true. You probably know Double Verify best for our quality solutions, right? And you know, I think the thing that we have realized over the past couple of years is in this new paradigm where it's more challenging to link audience, link events by user, quality becomes increasingly important as a filter for measuring performance and effectiveness, right? It's really a foundational element, and I'm going to talk about why that is, right? So how do we think about quality? You've seen all of these different metrics before, certainly, and for us, quality is really meeting those minimum standards, right? The minimum standards that an individual impression must reach in order to be considered not necessarily valuable, but considered to be valuable, right? And it really encompasses the four key elements that you see here. The first is fraud. Is my ad served to a real user? Environment that is free of measurement manipulation, and I can trust the data that I'm getting from measurement. The second is suitability, right? How is the environment that my ad appears in, is it both safe from harmful content, clearly harmful content like hate speech and things like that, but also is it aligned with my brand values? Does it reinforce my brand positioning? Is it suitable for me and the types of ways that I wish to speak to my consumers or potential buyers? You know, geo is sort of the forgotten element of quality, right? But it's really important, whether it's a regulatory environment related to geography, you're in a regulated business, you might not have availability in certain locations, you might only be able to sell your services. So obviously that's a key component depending on the type of service that you're offering. And finally, viewability, right? Everybody here is all about viewability. The key to viewability is it's the minimum standard, right? It's the opportunity to influence the user. It's really a yes or no decision. And so, you know, all of this seems very straightforward, double verify. And I have been talking about this for 10 plus years in the market, right? But you'd be surprised at how often we see these being measured individually as metrics, but also being sort of disjointed or separated from the performance measurement. And I think the key for us is you need, backwards. That's really why we created the authentic ad. That's a single proprietary MRC accredited metric that we use that's the intersection of those 4 key quality characteristics, and it becomes foundational. You shouldn't be measuring performance on ads that don't meet these minimum standards. Why do I care about how much attention an ad impression got if it is a bot that is generating that attention? Why do I care about you know, whether the sound was on completion if it was served outside of a geography where I can offer my service? So the synergy in this new paradigm where I can't directly link all of these actions by an individual user, it's really important that quality become that foundational element for measuring. And the key to success is I have to do it everywhere, right? I have to be able to do it on my retail networks, on social networks, in CTV, on display ads, video, etc. Doesn't matter the device, it doesn't matter the channel, it doesn't matter the buying mechanism. I have to be able to consistently determine these core characteristics of quality before I go and evaluate the impression for performance, right? And that's what the authentic ad does, is it becomes that single metric to determine quality. So now that we've gotten the quality portion out of the way, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we're thinking about performance and we see performance evolving in this new market, right? We've all heard about contextual targeting, right? It's on the rise. What's old is new again, but it's not the same as it was when I first started in online advertising over 20 years ago. You know, double-click network, contextual targeting, it was all there, and now we're back where we were 20 years ago. But it's not the same, right? The way we think about contextual targeting today versus what was done back then or even done more recently is it's very different. Now it's all about the semantic science of content evaluation, AI tools to your analysis. It's about doing it at the individual piece of content level, at the page level or within the mobile application or within the CTV stream, doing it directly within that environment and understanding at a granular level of detail exactly what type of environment's being served in. And it's making a comeback for all these reasons we talk about. The first is we know it's privacy friendly. It doesn't require, it's a fantastic proxy about your audience, right? Because you know that they're consuming content of a certain type of interest, and that's as good an indication about some of your audience as, you know, as other factors. It's relevant, it's not annoying, it's less invasive, right? We all know that consumers appreciate advertising that is relevant to the environment that is being served in. And then it also fights banner blindness. There was a study that was done I'm going to get that wrong. I guess I can't scroll. There's a study that was done by Interlinks that showed that a unknown brand that was served a product ad in a contextually relevant environment gained more awareness. I think it was 80% more awareness than a known brand serving an ad in a uncontextual, untargeted environment. So it creates that synergy between the content and the creative that has been demonstrated to have a greater impact on the user, right? So while we all know and have loved audience targeting for the last decade plus, right, we've come to recognize the limitations and see now through some of these studies how relying on contextual relevance can give you increased performance in ways we didn't anticipate. And so that impact of using contextual targeting really goes to the bottom line. It builds upon suitability, right? Suitability is sort of the outermost edge, the outermost protection around context, right? I've clearly defined the things that I don't want my brand to be around. And that alone can be shown to increase the connection that you have with the consumer, right? Consumers, 87% of consumers feel that brands bear responsibility for that environment. So the ad is adjacent to content that supports their brand. But then when I get down to relevance, relevance to my campaign, relevance to my creative, relevance to my objectives, right? By refining that content even further, you can see that you have increased effectiveness related to the content they're reading. It's reinforced not only by these statistics around surveying consumers, but it's also reinforced through lots and lots and lots of case studies. There's one that we did with a major home retailer that showed that contextual targeting through a combination of both things like event-driven categories of, hey, I'm interested in comparison shopping content relevant to home improvement or listicles or things like that, performs really, really well for their brand. And then also developing highly customized, again, this goes back to contextual targeting is so much different than it was. It's so much more granular and more effective. We can create content and source content that's only related to home safety, right? And show product ads or consumer home improvement ads right next to that content that are demonstrated to do better than when they are not targeted, right? So contextual targeting works. It's highly relevant to driving performance. It's very privacy friendly, and it's also being more and more widely adopted. So, I've gone over probably two things that you've probably heard about, you've seen in the marketplace, and are fairly well known and have been established. And I'm going to spend the second half of the presentation talking about attention. This is a term that is bandied about. Like everybody talks about attention. There's no standard definition of what it is, right? But it's very, very important when thinking about how we're going to influence consumers or how you should influence consumers in this new world, right? Americans now spend more time per day online than they do sleeping, nearly 8 hours per day. The number of ads that the average American sees has gone up from around 500 a couple of decades ago to up to 10,000 per day today, right? So there's tremendous competition for that attention. And what we've also seen is just in the last few years, Microsoft did a study that showed that consumer attention continues to reduce significantly. The average attention span of a consumer online on their mobile devices, et cetera, is down to 8 seconds. Down, I think, over 20% just in the last few years. So that competition, that ability to create attention, understand attention, is really about the opportunity to understand your ability to influence the consumer at the moment your creative is being rendered, right? And I think this is a really important element, right? And so when Double Verify thinks about attention, it goes beyond those traditional KPIs. We think about things like, can I determine that the user is present while my creative is being shown on the device? What is the overall quality of the ad presentation when it's rendered? And by looking deeper at these metrics, like you can see marketers have heard about attention. 98% believe that deeper attention metrics will help them improve their campaign performance and reach their marketing objectives. And we're here to talk about how we're doing it and how our customers are using it. So, little recap, right? The authentic ad is the baseline. You have to filter out. If you're measuring some of these enhanced attention metrics without eliminating those things which should never be considered, then you've already started with, sort of one arm tied behind your back, right? So that's the authentic ad, and that's foundational to the initiation of performance measurement. And then for those impressions that meet that standard, right, attention for Double Verify means we're providing real-time impression level measurement around exposure and engagement, right? So we're building on that quality metric of the DV authentic ad and then measuring these things called exposure and engagement, which I'm going to talk about. But the sum output of that is what we call authentic attention. It's ad impressions that meet your minimum standards for quality, and you have an impression level, direct, real-time indication of that creative exposures to that user and the ability to influence the end user. So, attention's really complex, right? And you probably hear some people talk about attention as simply, attention is just time in view. That is very, very simplistic. It's useful in some regards, but it's far too simple to really capture those things that are necessary to measure sort of the ability of an ad exposure to influence a user. All right, and so it's important to understand that it's much more than just time in view. It's really the combination of what we call exposure, which is presentation, I'm going to talk about what that is, and engagement, which is those user interactions. I think it's also important to understand that we really feel, and are working with our advertising partners, attention is best as a relative metric. Nobody knows what a 12% scroll rate or a 3% hover rate means, right? But what I can tell you is I could tell you these impressions on an individual basis had 200% more attention than average, or had 50% less attention than average. And that's really important to be actionable, right? And then it's also really important to measure on every impression. If you think about the use cases for attention, I want to be able to look at 100 different ad creatives against 50 different content environments and be able to determine which one's attention in each of those metrics. If I have a panel of 5,000 eye tracking users, I can't do that. But if I'm measuring attention on every single impression, then I can create that really highly segmented calculation to look at performance. I'm going to skip that in the interest of time. So let's talk about, when we talk about exposure for us is one half of the equation, right? It's all about measuring the presentation of the creative on the device. It has nothing to do with the user. And this is really the first half of attention, right? And so if I think about things like exposure, we really break it into two pieces. One is intensity. And so intensity in video is about all those things that make video creatives great. I have a certain ad that has a certain duration, and I want to measure how much of it's completed, how much of that completion is viewable, was the sound on, how much was played in full screen, right? So all of those things combined together help create a sense of the intensity of that video ad creative when it is rendered on the device. Again, completely independent of the user. But the other half of exposure, in addition to that intensity of the presentation, is really around what is it competing with, right? And it doesn't really matter if an ad is competing with other ads or just video that's on the page, right? It's all competing for that attention. So the concept of share of screen, right, like, you know, is incredibly important to how much attention you're capturing and how much your ability is to influence the user. I might have a video ad that's an outstream ad playing in the bottom corner, occupying 2% of the screen real estate, and it's viewable and it's sound on and it's played to completion and it has great intensity, but guess what? 98% of the screen real estate's occupied by their content. Not going to have as much opportunity to influence the consumer as one that's occupying more of the screen. So again, seems like very simple, straightforward concepts, but putting them together to create exposure metrics is really complex. The second half of attention, if the first half is all about presentation of the creative, the second half is about the user. I can't have attention without the user, right? It's the old saying, you know, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, did it make a sound, right? Same thing with an ad. If there's nobody at the screen, if there's nobody at the device, if there's nobody holding their cell phone, then you don't know if you've had the opportunity to influence the consumer, right? And so for us, engagement is really this two-stage measurement designed to A, determine that the user is present at the device while the ad creative is being rendered, right? It's not just present at the device sometime, it's simultaneous to the creative presentation. The device itself, the hardware on the device, they're interacting with the software, the browsers, they're scrolling, they're touching a mobile device, right? All of those things are different interactions, right? And when there's user interaction that is happening at the same time as the ad creative, then you can make the assessment, and we've done that through studies that show that the user actually has the opportunity, they're sitting there, right? I'm a consumer of a lot of sports content. If I'm watching videos that are autoplay, highlight clips, and there's ads in between, if I get up and walk away, right, then I may not be at the device in order to receive that ad exposure, right? So that's what user presence is measuring. It's measuring, can I determine times that the user is actually present at the device while the ad is being played back, right? And then the second level of signals is about user interactions with creative itself. Are they clicking it? Are they touching it? Are they interacting with the video player, turning the sound up? Right? All those things that indicate that sort of second level of engagement, that higher level engagement, not only are they present at the device, but they're actually interacting with my ad. Again, a strong signal around the ability for that individual impression to drive those performance outcomes without knowing anything directly about the consumer, right? So, because they're measured on every impression, attention metrics can be a really rich source of action to improve campaign performance in this new world, right? Whether it's looking to opt sites, creating a new PMP, identifying the best alignment of your creative to certain sites or in certain times of day, right? All of these things can be used, are different mechanisms where attention data and relative attention to individual ad impressions can be used to optimize performance without looking at individual user level data. And what we've seen from releasing this is that there is a really high level of correlation. It's not the same for everyone. These metrics don't just universally align exactly, but what we see is exposure, engagement, and attention drives outcomes. And we have a series of case studies that we've done around a telecom provider where high engagement impressions had 250% more likely conversion to sales. Brand awareness outcomes, high exposure impressions, 1/2 of the attention cycle, were much more likely to drive an increase in brand awareness and brand consideration, 9 and 8 points each. So really positive correlations between attention data and those outcomes that you want to continue to measure and need to continue to influence in order to successfully make use of your media budget. So key takeaways, wrapping up. Got to start with quality. If you're not removing those impressions from your consideration set, then you are definitely sub-optimizing performance. Get compliant. I think everybody's working on that, right? Context is king, and context should not be thought of the way it was 10 years ago. It's highly actionable, very precise, and is a really good proxy for the intent of the audience. And last is attention matters. We all have to start moving beyond the traditional metrics and evolve our thinking to do the next level of privacy-friendly performance measurement, and attention is a key component of that. So with that, I want to thank you very much. Thanks for joining today, and enjoy the rest of Advertising Week.